Sup guys, so YouTube has announced that they are removing the dislike function from the videos. Now they are not technically removing the dislike button. The button will still be there, but they are removing the amount of dislikes that is displayed like beneath the video. So you can press the button, but you cannot see how many dislikes the video actually has. And they say they are doing this to protect the smaller creators, because if you are a smaller creator and your video gets dislikes, then you start to cry, you get sad, and you get mental health problems. And so YouTube doesn't want that to happen to the smaller creators, and so they are removing the amount of dislikes that are displayed on the video. Now, first of all, a lot of people straight up don't believe this, and they say that this is like a conspiracy. You know, they're doing this to protect their political interests. But we'll get to that in a minute as well. We'll talk about that briefly. But even if, and this is the bigger point that I want to make in this video, even if they are really doing this to protect the smaller creators, I think that this is a bad idea. I think that this is going to have adverse effects. I think it is only going to make mental health problems among creators bigger. So YouTube says, at YouTube, we strive to be a place where creators of all sizes and backgrounds, you know, you got to be inclusive as well, can find and share their voice. To ensure that YouTube promotes respectful interaction between viewers and creators, we introduced several features and policies to improve their experience. And earlier this year, we experimented with the dislike button to see whether or not changes could help better protect our creators from harassment and reduce dislike attacks, where people work to drive up the number of dislikes on a creator's videos. So apparently this whole dislike attacks is a big thing that they keep talking about. And that's this thing where people use like bots, or people use like rage with several people, and they visit one person's YouTube channel that they hate. They press the dislike button, you know, so that that video gets like a disproportional amount of dislikes that it should have normally gotten. And yes, I understand that if that happens to your videos, that sucks. That's not nice, because it's essentially like, it's like a form of harassment. It's like a form of bullying, right? And now YouTube says that from the results of their experiment, they could see that this removing the amount of dislikes displayed on the video makes it less likely for people to want to harass people like this with dislike attacks. And I guess that makes sense. You know, when the video no longer displays the amount of dislikes, that makes it less likely that you want to press the dislike button, because why? Why would you press the dislike button, right? And so yes, I'm sure that removing the function like this eliminates, well, it reduces the instances of dislike attacks. My point here is, I'm not quite sure if removing the actual dislike function was the answer. Because what you're doing is that you are essentially removing the medium, right? You're not really removing the problem. You're just using the medium that people use to bully. I mean, because what's next? You could say roughly the same thing about the comments. The comments allow people to bully other people. And if we were to remove the comments from YouTube videos, well, that reduces the amount of bullying that is going on in the comments, right? And then what's next? Video games, maybe, because video games have a chat function. And if we remove the chat function from video games, well, then there's less players getting bullied by other players. If we forbid toddlers to speak to each other in kindergarten, well, then there's less verbal bullying going on among toddlers. Great solution, right? Except is it? Because you're removing the medium, and you're removing a medium that has an essential role. Now, sure, toddlers talking to each other might be slightly more important than the dislike function on YouTube, but it's not like the dislike function is still completely useless. I mean, the dislike function has its use. As PewDiePie says in his video, he uses a perfect example. He says, if I am looking for a tutorial in a certain topic, right, and I see several different tutorials, I see like 3 different tutorials, and the one is rated very well, and the other one has a lot of dislikes, well, you know that you are not going to watch that video with a lot of dislikes, because it's probably a bad tutorial, right? Aside from this whole dislike attacks, and yes, that might be a problem, but there's just like a tiny problem compared to the general rating that videos have. And so generally speaking, if you see a video that has a bunch of dislikes, well, you know that it's just a bad video. And so the fact that you can no longer see this is just very impractical. And now this is the part where a lot of people are starting to get suspicious, because guess what? Small creators will still be able to find their exact dislike counts in the YouTube studio. So YouTube is claiming that they are doing this to protect their small creators, so that small creators no longer get upset from seeing how much dislikes they get. But small creators can still see how many dislikes they get. And so a lot of people are starting to say things like, well, this isn't about protecting small creators, it's about protecting big brands and advertisers. Because I'm sure most of you guys remember when, like a couple of years back, it was Gillette that came up with this woke commercial, right? Not sure what the commercial went like anymore, but it was like a completely woke commercial, and practically nobody liked it. Now this reflected in the amount of dislikes that the video got. And it is not just about seeing that amount of dislikes, but the dislike button kind of felt like the people had a way to fight back against the propaganda, right? Because it felt like these corporations had no opportunity to shove their propaganda and their political opinions into our face, because we, the people, could show everyone that we disliked it, right? The whole world saw that propaganda attempt failed because of the dislike button, because the video was getting so many dislikes. And we can see the exact same thing going on right now with like certain news videos on YouTube. They can try to shove their political opinions in our face, but it doesn't work, because the whole world can see that it's a failed attempt. But if YouTube were to remove the amount of dislikes that is being displayed on a video, the whole world can no longer see that this is a failed attempt, and so it will become easier for people to swallow certain political opinions, to become more susceptible to the propaganda that certain websites are trying to push. And so it would be extremely convenient for YouTube if the dislike function would be gone, because it would be so much easier for them to just push the political opinions that they want to push without any way of the people fighting back. And so this has made a lot of people skeptical, but YouTube just replies to this by saying, well, we see why some folks might think that, though it is absolutely not the case. We are making the dislike count private to protect our creators by reducing targeted dislike attacks on their channels. Now, I am not going to go further into depth on this conspiracy stuff. It is up to you what you decide to believe. But to be honest, the story is a little bit suspicious. It doesn't really add up that much, considering the fact that creators can still see the actual dislikes on their videos. And yes, I'm sure that it will reduce the targeted dislike attacks on their channels, but really, is that such a big problem? Like, no offense to anyone that is actually suffering from targeted dislike attacks, but like when you look at the broad picture, that is probably like only a tiny fraction of what is going on with the actual dislike button. And even if that is a problem to some people, I'm not sure if removing the medium is the best solution. But enough of the whole conspiracy stuff. I'm not going to give my own opinion on that, just stating the facts objectively. The actual purpose of this video is to just assume that YouTube has the best intention for small creators. For the sake of this video, we are going to assume that they actually do care about people and that they actually are trying to protect us by removing the dislike function. And now, in my humble opinion, I think that if we are trying to protect this, that removing the dislike button is a bad idea. Let me explain to you why. In my humble opinion, and I'm not claiming that I'm always right, but in my opinion, I think that one of the big problems that we are facing today is that we are becoming weaker and weaker over time, right? We live in this snowflake generation, especially the younger generations right now. They grow up and they think they are entitled to everything. They never really, because they are so overprotected, they never really learn to deal with the bad parts of life. And so what we see is that then these kids grow up and then reality hits. They have to do something like, they have to work like a job, a normal job, full-time job of 40 hours a week. And what happens? They get a burnout, they get a quarter-life crisis because the stress of the job is too much, right? that happens more and more. Now, what is the problem? Right? Is the problem the fact that they are working a 40-hour job, which people have been doing since like forever, or is the problem that we have a generation growing up that is not mentally resilient enough to deal with the stress of a 40-hour work week? Right? What is the problem? Now, I am not trying to be like offensive against people that are not mentally resilient enough to deal with something like that. I mean, I understand that mental health is a complex thing and there are many factors involved that are not your own fault, right? I'm not saying that these people should be laughed at or shamed or anything. But the truth is, the problem is in here, right? The problem is not the 40-hour work week. And I think the exact same thing can be said about the dislike button. Yes, there might be people that get upset when their videos get a bunch of dislikes. It might hurt their mental health. But at the same time, there are also plenty of people that are not affected by it like that. The problem is not the button. The problem is here. And one of the biggest reasons why we see more and more people that are not mentally resilient enough to deal with these things that people have always been dealing with quite successfully is the fact that right now we grow up in a society that is becoming more and more overprotective, which is causing us to become softer and softer, aka less mentally resilient. And so I think that the very irony of removing the button is that they are trying to protect us, at least we're assuming that they're trying to protect us for now, but they are trying to protect us, but the way that they are trying to protect us is by overprotecting us, by shielding us from all the bad parts of life, which is just making us weaker and weaker over time because we never learn to deal with the bad parts. And that's actually making the problem worse because reality will hit eventually, right? There will always be things that are going to happen to you that are bad. It can be anything, right? You can lose your job. A relative of you might die. A good friend of you might die in a car crash. An economic crisis might hit. Right? There are so many things that are going to happen. And the more of these overprotection things that we have going on, like removing the dislike button because the dislike button might hurt someone's feelings, that is going to make us weaker and weaker over time. That is actually the very problem. Right? The problem is not the button. The problem is in here. It is the fact that we are weaker. And so that is exactly why I think that even assuming that YouTube is actually trying to protect us, that trying to protect us is over the long term going to make things worse.